All right, and are you Mr. Robbins? Are both parties ready to proceed with trial?
Your Honor, we're ready. We do want to make an announcement. We are going to be recalling Officer Apgar for one or two questions. It's regarding jurisdiction, whether or not the location was in Burke County. And after that, Bernstein will be on.
Okay. All right, you want to have that witness take the stand in defense. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Deputy Lord, let's line the jurors up. And state you wanted to recall the detective, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly.
All right. And you're still under oath. If you could restate your name for the record, please.
My name is Danielle Apgar, APGAR.
All right, state.
Officer Apgar, thank you for coming back today. Yesterday, we talked about whether you were able to identify a suspect. Were you able to identify the offense location?
Yes, sir.
And was that offense location in Bexar County?
Yes, it was.
Pass the witness, Judge.
All right, any other questions?
No questions, Your Honor.
All right, is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may step down. State, call your next witness.
The state calls Kelly Bernstein.
All right, and off the record for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, there's probably going to be somebody zooming in, but it is unrelated to this case, all right? It's just somebody who wants to see someone in one of the breakout rooms, so they'll be zooming in, but it is in no way associated with this case, so please ignore that. Does everyone understand?
Okay, and you mentioned that you are a licensed counselor, correct?
Yes, I'm an LPC, which is licensed professional counselor, and an LCDC, which is licensed clinical dependency counselor.
Your
So-
Honor, I'm sorry, but I can barely hear her.
All right, if you can make sure that you keep your voice up and speak into the microphone so that both parties can hear.
Okay,
And if you could restate the last part about your licenses, please.
yes, ma'am. I have a dual license, LPC, licensed professional counselor. I also have an LCDC, licensed chemical dependency counselor.
Can you tell us a little bit of what does one need to do to become a licensed counselor?
You have a master's, you have a master's degree in social work, psychology, counseling, a related field, and then you perform 3,000 hours as an internship, which is where you would be out in the field, you're assigned a state supervisor, and you perform your hours under the supervision of someone who is fully licensed and is there to kind of coach you, teach you, look over things along the way.
Do you, and how long have you been a licensed counselor?
Since 2012,
So would that be about, what is it, 12 years maybe?
yes, sir. Yes, I began before that, but I did practice hours and intern hours. So.
Got it. Okay, so what kind of clients do you focus on? Or have you focused in the past? So let's start there.
Children and family.
Okay, so for the past 12 years, have you focused on children and family?
Yes,
Is there any specialized training that you underwent or went through to become focused on children and families?
I performed my internship hours. I worked out at Army Community Services which is an organization out on Fort Sam Houston, and you work with the families of soldiers that have been killed, and it was focused on depression and coping and moving forward. I performed an internship in a San Antonio school here where I helped to test children for learning disabilities and then working with the school and the parents to help explain those disabilities and what was needed to assist those children, and then to help relay that information to the state so the state can relay it to the federal so that you can get funding to help those special needs children in the school. From that point forward, I've worked with children who have gone through family issues, have been assaulted in some way. I often receive court appointments. And I receive those appointments from here in Bexar County and the surrounding 12 counties.
You mentioned family issues. Would that include divorce and custody cases?
Yes.
Right. And what do you mean by assault? Would that mean physical assault or sexual assault or both?
It could be either one: sexual, physical, verbal, and mental abuse.
Can you talk a little bit about court appointments? How have you participated in the legal system in the past throughout your 12 years?
Court appointments is where the judge would see fit to work with the child or family in some capacity. It might be as the child therapist. I do a lot of reunification work, which is where a child and a parent may have been separated for a period of time for whatever reason, and you're trying to help bring that relationship together. Initially, I did a lot of work with soldiers that were coming back and had children that had never met them or seen them, didn't know who they were. We also do a lot of reunification for families of divorce where children haven't seen parents or been separated. I do assessments that might be for abuse of any sort, PTSD. I also do parent facilitation, which is where the court sees that there's a high conflict between the parents that's causing issue to the child. And so I'm assigned to work with the parents as a counselor, as a mediator, sometimes to make decisions.
Regarding the place where you work for, do you work for yourself or do you work with other counselors?
I'm a private practitioner.
And as a private practitioner, did you ever encounter a client named Arabella Robbins?
Yes. Yes.
How long have you seen Arabella Robbins?
February 16th, 2022 was the first time that I met her.
Let's show you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 7, okay? That's this record. So I'm going to show you what is marked as State's Exhibit 7. Do you recognize this?
Yes, it appears to be a copy of my records.
Okay. Records for which client?
Miss Arabella Robbins.
Okay. So feel free to scroll through the pages and read to yourself, but do not read out loud from the exhibit. This would be for the purposes of refreshing your recollection. So when did Arabella first come to you? I guess first tell us a little bit more about how you get clients. You mentioned some of them are court appointed. Is that all of your population or do they come?
No, not all of my clients are court appointed. I also accept clients for independent therapy, which is not court appointed, but someone who has located me. I receive referrals from the court, attorneys, different persons that have worked with me in the past.
Okay, before we get to Arabella, so take us through the process of a counseling session. What is the first visit like?
The initial visit would include completing paperwork and speaking with the parent or parents to get a background history, find out why they're pursuing counseling, find out why it's important. and to assess if I'm the right person to be the counselor. I might not be. There might not be a therapeutic bond. It might be in an area that I don't feel I'm well practiced, and I feel like maybe a colleague might be a better fit. And it's to evaluate the emotional and mental level that the child is at. And sometimes I will come across things where I will refer to a doctor or a pediatrician. It's an overall scanning process. You want to know, why is the client there? What's the presenting issue? And how are you going to move forward?
So normally during your initial visit, do you meet with the parent and the child or just the child?
I typically meet with the parent individually and then the child individually.
So, okay, so then when mom or when dad or with the guardian is giving you the background information, the child is not listening to what's going on.
No, I have a well isolated, very well stocked playroom waiting area. And I ask people that the child wait out there. They're welcome to bring a babysitter or relative if they need be. My office is located down the hallway from my waiting area, so we don't have to worry about any conversation being overheard. I present white noise in my office to make sure that conversation is not overheard. And there are 2 shut doors between my waiting area and my office.
Okay, so I guess because you deal with children often, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the environment of where you conduct your sessions?
My office, I am an independent practitioner. I'm just gonna explain the office where the therapy takes place, just that room. Is that what you're asking about? Okay. I do practice along with other things, play therapy in my office. My office is very large. It's probably about as big as like from the end of the jury bench there to here to the end of the defense counsel's table over there. It's a large setting. You need a large setting for play therapy. It's carpeted, but also in the middle of the room is a rug, medallion rug, and it helps to, you know, keep the play on the rug or to focus on what we're doing in the environment. I have different toys that I will utilize, dollhouse, play figures, games, things of that nature. But I also have a couch that people utilize to just sit and talk if they would like. And my desk where I sit and where my materials are is located there. It's a comfortable environment. It's intentionally decorated and designed to promote calm and cooperation and comfortableness for a child or for a family environment. Kind of looks like a living room maybe, with a bunch of toys spread out on the floor sometimes.
And the age group that you normally see the most, would it be children, preteens, teens?
I see children from age 3 and on up and family members. I would say that the majority of my practice is focused on the family as a whole. But I have a lot of young child clients. Typically, I'd say probably age 5 to age 15.
Okay. So let's talk about the first time that you met with Arabella. So what information did you have at this point when you first received, I guess, the referral or the information about the case?
Okay. The first session, February 16th, I met with mom. She shared
Objection, Your Honor, it's called for hearsay.
Sustained.
So remember, we cannot have anything that mom shared,
Okay.
so let's just go with the information that you knew. And how did you first approach it?
Okay, Arabella was there due to a sexual outcry. And I knew that the child had made an outcry and that law enforcement had been involved. The child had undergone a forensic interview and she had made a specific outcry against a specific person.
Okay. And with the information that you have, you did you conduct an initial evaluation with Arabella?
I did. I worked with the child to find what the presenting issue was, but also it's important to develop a therapeutic relationship, to develop a trust, a level of comfort, a place that the child can feel safe. You don't want the child to feel anxious or interrogated or like they are there to undergo a question and answer session. You want to create a comfortable environment for several reasons, because you're working with children and you want to make sure that they're comfortable. But you don't want to force information out of people, and oversharing in an initial session is something that can be dangerous to the client and unbeneficial to the overall process.
I see. When you met with Arabella, do you remember how long you met with her the first time?
Yes, it was 1 hour. Most sessions are an hour, and this one was an hour.
Okay. I know that you mentioned that you also talked to the parent beforehand. Is that including with the parent, or is that just an hour for Arabella and then another hour for the parent?
The hour would be for the parent and for the child. I typically, in an initial session, will cut the hour 30 minutes and 30 minutes. After that, following sessions, I will try to sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes do a update with the parent if necessary, and then spend the majority of the session with the child.
Got it. And for the first session with Arabella, what were your observations?
She was anxious, but she was open to trust. She seemed to feel comfortable with myself. She didn't want to play. She just wanted to sit and talk. She talked a lot about people that she had shared with, and we talked about a feeling of safety within that group. And she felt like she had been surrounded by people that she felt safe with.
Did she discuss with you any of the allegations?
She did not outright discuss the allegations. She discussed what was happening, what she was feeling because she had made an outcry in the initial session.
Did she demonstrate to you any of the allegations?
Not in this session.
Okay. And we're talking about, remind me the date for the initial visit?
Initial visit, February 16 of 2022.
I do want to direct your attention to the last page, the page 3 of that visit.
The page that I have marked, page 3.
Yeah, I'm gonna go up there. So to ask the question one more time, did she discuss with you the allegations that she's been making with you?
She discussed some behaviors that were resulting from the allegations.
Okay, and what demonstrations did she make?
She demonstrated a washing in the shower. She'd made an outcry against a person, and this person would wash her in the shower and washed her belly hard. He would wash what she referred to as her circle, which was the word that she used for her vaginal area. And that it would be washed hard and that it would hurt. She had Kleenex that she used. She placed the Kleenex and she rubbed in between her legs up and down in her clitoral region. We were talking about the masturbation behaviors that she was demonstrating. Later on, I would discuss some of this with Mom, and she would discuss Her circle, her triangle, which is the genital area of a male. She displayed with a baby Yoda doll, hugging it tightly in an uncomfortable manner to show me that she was hugged very tightly from the back, her back to the person's chest, and that it was hugging to the extent of being uncomfortable and it hurt.
Was she emotional when she was telling you any of this information?
She was emotional. She was a little anxious. She appeared to be scared. But she needed someone to talk to. She needed a relationship that she could express information to. And I felt like that was positive, and she seemed to be building that with me. I was understanding. I was open to hear what she had to say. There's no shame or judgment.
And this was the first visit. How often did you end up seeing Arabella?
At first, it was weekly, and then over the course of time, the appointments spread out more and more.
So the next time that you saw her, when was that?
February 18,
That would be 2 days after the initial visit?
2 days after the initial visit.
Is this where you have the first official session, or is this just a continuation of the first?
Well, this is the first session where we spend a long period of time together, and get into more detailed information and further discuss what the overall issue is.
And what was the issue? Did you end up finding what the issue was, or were you still looking at that?
The child continued to discuss her circle, vaginal area, rectangle, which is how she referred to her anal area, and triangle, which was the genital area of the male. And we began discussing further some of the trauma that she had undergone.
At any point, did you notice any symptoms that were significant to you about her? Or any signs?
The child appeared very saddened when she discussed the behavior. She was anxious. She appeared down and depressed. Recalling the events appeared difficult to her and painful, emotionally painful.
Did she ever have any panic attacks while she was seeing you?
She did display symptoms of panic attacks and anxiety attacks.
How did you end up, so what was your proposed approach or treatment for her, particularly for her to cope with what she was going through?
To avoid triggers, and when a anxiety attack or panic attack was being sensed, to intervene, to redirect, to understand what was happening, be sensitive to the child, allow the child to express what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what was going on. And then there were other ideas presented, such as techniques at bedtime, breathing techniques for when anxiety or panic attacks are taking place, environmental solutions, such as the child was having issues sleeping. So we make sure that the child knows their room is secure. We make sure that if the child wants something in the room to comfort her, that she has that.
So regarding the bedtime, so did she ever indicate to you about having nightmares?
She did.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that it was these sexual abuse allegations were towards a person. Did she ever tell you who that person was?
Yes, she did.
Okay, and who was that?
It was her father.
Biological father?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever met with her father?
Yes, I have.
Do you recognize him if he's in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you describe him with an article of clothing? using an article of clothing?
He's wearing a dark blue suit.
Have you ever, um, what exactly did she share about her being afraid about her father?
Arabella was scared that her father would be angry that she had outcried. She was also worried that he was going to kill himself. She was worried that her father was going to try to harm her, to harm her family. She was worried that father would come in the night, or at school to take her.
Were there any instances of self-harming displayed with Arabella?
Yes, yes, there were.
Can you please tell us which ones?
Arabella began to bite herself very hard. She would do this in her arms. That was the main self-injury, was the biting, and there was also some scratching that took place.
Did her panic attacks ever affect her daily life?
Her daily life, yes, yes, they did. They affected her at home, out with the family, her school environment in particular.
So you, of course, focus on children because this is your population. How do you find these, how would you describe all these signs? Would you consider them to be extreme?
The signs that Arabella specifically exhibited,
Correct.
they were extreme. They were extreme to the degree that medication was pursued.
Okay. Do you know if she was ever diagnosed with anything?
I don't remember if she was. No, she wasn't diagnosed with anything previously. I was looking if there was like an ADHD or something of that nature, but there's nothing listed on the initial intake.
What about after she started counseling with you?
After she started counseling with me, she would be diagnosed as having PTSD, and she was having anxiety and depression.
Okay. Because you've evaluated, do you still see Arabella?
Yes,
How has her progress been like?
her progress goes up and down. It's been difficult for her. This hearing has been reset several times. It's been spread out over a long period of time. Arabella will begin to exhibit trauma symptoms when she has to revisit the discussion of the trauma. She'll have the nightmares, she'll have the panic attacks. She begins to break down and be sad. She'll recognize triggers again, things that we had worked on. Her therapeutic progress regresses.
At this time, Judge, the state pass the witness.
Right, defense.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Bernstein, my name is John Floyd, we've met once before, just the other day.
Are you Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to ask you a few questions about, kind of going back to where the Mr. Saldana, kind of started off. So you're, and I didn't catch it because you mentioned that you work privately, but you also did something else, and I couldn't hear that. What, at the very beginning?
I work as a private practitioner and I take on a lot of court-appointed clients. That's the majority of my practice is forensic in nature, but I do also take on individual clients that are not appointed by the court or that are not involved in the court system at all.
Okay, okay. So you take on court appointments and you also have private clients that pay directly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You mentioned that you do, I guess you see both children and families.
Yes, sir.
you mentioned, and, and how did this case initially come to you?
I believe that this case was referred through an attorney that mom had previously worked with.
Okay, so this case was referred through mom's attorney?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. And in a situation like that, how are you paid? Who pays you?
The parent pays me.
Do both parents pay you?
They would, in the beginning, it was only, the mother, but eventually, Mr. Jordan would, Robbins, he would, join the therapeutic process and he would pay also.
Okay, so he also paid for your services?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You said that you see, I guess, children, they come to you for many different reasons, right? One of the things I heard you talk about was that a part of your practice involves reunification. Is that right?
Yes.
So what does that mean?
Reunification is where a child has been separated from a parent for some reason, or there is a problem in the relationship for some reason. And you work on the relationship between the two parties to reunify them in a more positive manner.
Would you see that on cases where children are separated from their parents because of court proceedings?
I have seen court proceedings intervening in custody, yes, sir.
Where parents would have been separated from their children for an extended period of time, and then your job was to help them get back together after things were resolved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with the concept of parental alienation?
Yes.
And what is that?
Parental alienation is where a child will reject a parent for sometimes no reason. It is where one parent will influence or coach the child to destroy the relationship with the target parent.
Okay. And have you experienced that in your practice before?
Yes,
And have you had to engage in parental reunification after that?
yes.
What, I guess, what kind of behaviors would you normally see from a parent who was alienating their child from another parent?
Sometimes you don't notice any behaviors from that parent, observing them firsthand. You would recognize that that parent was typically bad mouthing, saying negative things about the targeted parent. You would see what is,
Let me interrupt you right there. Would that be, they're saying targeted things about the other parent to the child?
yes, sir.
Okay. And next?
They would practice what is referred to as gatekeeping behaviors, trying to interfere with custody, trying to interfere with communication between the child and the targeted parent.
So using, it's not, are you saying might use court proceedings to prevent a child from having access to another parent?
I have seen that in other cases, yes, sir.
How about criminal proceedings?
I have heard accusations of criminal activity in the past, yes.
Okay. And would you, and going back to reunification, when you had those kinds of situations, did you ever follow up, and were you the therapist for the reunification process?
Say that again, please.
When you experienced parental alienation in the past, or after a case was resolved and a child was returned from the parent who was alienated, have you ever worked in reunifying those families?
Yes,
So we talked about this particular case, and so Arabella was referred to you by mom, Miss Reed's attorney, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And the process is that you met with both parents?
Originally, I met with mom only, but dad began to come in, not in the sessions with mom and the child, but he began to come in individually.
Okay, so And it was my understanding that this began from your notes after the outcry of sexual abuse. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that outcry was before the child met me.
Yes. And it was after the forensic interview. You knew that a forensic interview had been conducted, right?
Yes,
Okay. And you met with mom initially voluntarily for an hour or so?
approximately 30 minutes, yes.
Okay. And that was when you broke that meeting with mom and the child?
The initial meeting, the first meeting ever, yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Robbins voluntarily came in and met with you as well.
Yes,
And they're not coming in with their lawyers, right? Just so we're clear, right? They're coming in alone to talk to you.
no attorneys, it's just them, right?
Okay, that would be intrusive, I would imagine.
I've had to ask more than one attorney to leave my office.
How many times did Mr. Jordan come in and meet with you?
Approximately 3,
Okay. Were those each within an hour each?
yes.
Did you know if he was represented at that time?
Yes, he was being represented.
But again, he voluntarily came in. He wasn't ordered to come in by the court to talk to you.
He was not ordered.
I was looking at your notes and, I'm sorry, you still have the copy there?
Yes,
I noticed on some of the notes as they proceed, that at the top of the page, there is, I'm sorry, maybe you can help me. At the top of the page, you'll say who was there. And it looks like in some of them, it was mom and Arabella.
in some of these, Mom and Arabella are listed on the persons present at session line, yes.
Okay. And was that how the therapy started? Was with mom and Arabella coming into the sessions?
Individually, this line at the top of here is for my reference. It helps me see who was there overall. Sometimes I'll have parents in the waiting area. Sometimes I'll have parents that will come back and talk before the session, after the session. I'll have grandparents, I'll have different people, and that is to help me know basically who was in my office.
Okay, and is that, and you mentioned you have a big office. Would the parent be in the larger office while you were meeting with the child?
No, sir, that would be in the waiting area.
Okay, okay. You mentioned, I guess at the beginning, some of the initial sessions, mom did sit through some of those sessions initially?
No, sir.
Thank you. How many times do you think you met with mom during, I guess, this entire time of your treatment?
I went through my notes and I've seen Arabella approximately 50 times.
Okay.
And I would say that probably 30 to 35 times I've had an update from mom or a conversation with mom and Arabella in the waiting area about something they did. Ballet, or we just came from such and such drive-through. I want this snap. Make sure to tell her about your birthday party, things of that nature.
I'm assuming that as the investigation was going and more was coming out, the mom also gave you updates about those things as well.
Yes,
She told you what was going on with the case and kind of kept you up to speed during these meetings you would have prior to your sessions.
pertaining to Arabella, what was happening with Arabella. If the child had been through a procedure, if the child had seen a pediatrician, if the child had been to a child psychiatrist, if the child had exhibited symptoms, and other things that maybe had occurred, incidents.
If the child had made additional outcries, which she had updated you about that?
Yes,
And were your meetings with mom just isolated to, I guess, these introductory follow-up sessions, but in our introductory meetings before you took the child to the session,
Yes,
did you ever meet with mom alone after that? Did you ever, I guess, individual half hours or hours with her?
I don't recall that I did, no.
You mentioned that there were some kind of disclosures that involved different shapes, which were used as references to body parts. Had you ever seen that before, that someone was using different shapes to identify the body parts?
Yes, I have seen children that come in and use all sorts of different words to describe different body parts. Yes,
And I'm asking specific, we've seen lots of, hoo-has and this and that. What I'm asking you is square, circle, and triangle. Have you ever seen that before?
I've heard circles several times.
You mentioned something, and I want to be clear about this. So you're providing therapy to Arabella and to your patients, right?
Yes, sir.
It's not your job to investigate or to get to the bottom of whether the child was telling the truth or not, right?
Sometimes it is, yes, sir. Like take court ordered assessments and things of that nature. Sometimes it's my job to go through and interview and see if an incident did or did not happen, try to find validity, things of that nature.
But just so we're clear, you're doing that from a psychological perspective, just, you're not acting as like an investigator or a fact finder for the court, correct? I'm sorry, what did you say?
No.
Okay. So when you say that the trauma that Arabella had undergone, like the words you used earlier, that was the trauma that was being relayed to you by either Arabella or by Arabella's mom.
And other sources as well.
And going back to what so let's go through some of that. You mentioned that you, I guess you had reports of panic attacks.
Yes, sir.
Do you know that she had a history of panic attacks prior to the allegations?
I knew that she had nervous and anxious tendencies. I don't recall if I was made aware of full out panic attacks or anxiety attacks.
Do you know whether or not she had self-harmed before the allegations?
Nothing was disclosed.
We also talked about I guess you were relayed that there were symptoms of issues with sleeping,
Yes,
anxiety,
yes,
nightmares.
Yes.
From your experience, have you seen other cases where children might have been alienated from one child and they just exhibited those kinds of circumstances, those kinds of symptoms?
clarify your question, please.
I'm asking you, have you seen other children when they were going through custody battles, going through, maybe criminal investigation, going through court proceedings where one child was removed from the other parent? Have you ever noticed that some of the child who was anxious in those circumstances,
Yes,
that would have panic attacks,
yes,
nightmares?
yes,
Because that kind of trauma is also real to a child, right? Being removed from a parent.
it can be.
You mentioned, and I didn't catch it, that in the notes that Arabella had told you at one point that Mr. Robbins had threatened to kill himself. Is that in your notes?
Can
Yeah, because I had.
you reference that?
I don't know where, the
Okay.
first time I heard it was in court. No.
Can I take a look?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think we may be referring to discussions on Monday, March 28th.
And I don't mean to, this is all in your handwriting, so it's taking a little bit of practice to read the notes.
The more I practice, the more my handwriting has deteriorated.
It's like doctor's handwriting.
It gets worse and worse, and it also gets worse throughout the day.
And I think I was asking you specifically about her relating to the shooter threatening to kill herself. And I don't see that part. Unless I'm still not.
It wasn't that he had threatened to kill himself.
Okay,
It
okay.
was that she was concerned
Okay.
that he would kill himself.
Okay. And that, with that particular note, was that coming from your notes with mom?
That was coming from, that was discussed during a session with the child directly from her to me.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
State.
Briefly, Judge. Okay, Ms. Bernstein, so you mentioned earlier that the defendant, Mr. Robbins, did meet with you 3 times.
Yes,
I think you also said that he was by himself, right?
yes,
And that means there was nobody in the waiting room with him?
there was no one else in the office.
Okay, so he was by himself. And the parental alienation that defense brought up, you mentioned that it could be, there could be signs of sleeping anxiety in children under those circumstances.
Yes,
Did you see any of those signs with Arabella pertaining to parental alienation?
I did not see things that pointed to parental alienation, but I did see symptoms that children who have experienced parental alienation can also, I mean, yes, children have nightmares for different reasons. Yes, they have anxiety for different reasons. It's my job to look at what the cause of those reasons is and to, if we're going to talk specifically about parental alienation, to look at just not these couple of little things, but to look at the big picture of parental alienation, to look at all of the things that would need to be present to fit a parental alienation category. Yeah, I mean, children can have nightmares because they've suffered a trauma. They can have nightmares because they're really super excited about their birthday party the next day. Or maybe they saw a scary movie, or maybe they were playing a video game with a monster in it before they went to bed. There can be different reasons for different responses. But you don't look at those symptoms in a vacuum. You look at the overall picture of the display of behavior.
So I guess, would it be fair to say that these symptoms are shared among children that have gone through parental alienation and children that have been sexually abused?
Yes.
So what about difference? So are there any difference signs among those two? Is there any signs that are present with children that have been abused that are not present with children with parental alienation that you're aware of?
Say the last part again, please.
So are there any signs that are present for children that have been abused and not that have been going through parental alienation? Is there a distinction?
Oh, yes, in this specific case.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
So we can't really get into this specific case. I'm talking in general.
Yes.
Can you give me some examples as to what symptoms are present in that are not present with parental alienation?
A love for the parent who is the target, or the person, the parent that's been removed, the child expresses a love, expresses a concern, a worry.
Okay, what about fear?
Fear. The child can express a fear, yes, due to trauma and sometimes due to parental alienation as well.
We pass the witness, Judge.
Defense.
Thank you, Judge. So I know you have lots of experience, and I don't mean this question to be insulting in a way, but you're not a mind reader, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And you're not telling any of us that you are, right?
Correct.
All you know is what you're told by the patient and the patient's family, right?
No. I also have police reports, forensic interviews, pediatricians, other counselors, teachers, all sorts of professionals who may add information to a case.
And all those may affect, I guess, the way you see a case, right?
Yes,
And all those documents, it sounds like police reports are generated by police, right? Forensic interviews are done by a person that's trained to interview children during criminal investigations, right? I'm sorry, she has to hear yes or no.
ask your question again, please.
Forensic interviews are also, they're prepared as part of a criminal investigation, right?
Yes,
And so it's fair to say that the documents that you receive, they could have a slant to them, right? And I'm sure you're cognizant of that.
yes,
I'd pass the witness, Your Honor.
One question, Judge. So you would agree with me, Ms. Bernstein, that by looking at this supplemental information, that would give you context of your client, right?
yes.
And that allows you to see things more clear.
It allows me to put together some pieces of a puzzle. I can't be everywhere all the time. Yes,
Because I think you said it earlier, right? You cannot look at things in a vacuum.
right. It's the convergence of information. When I have multiple different professionals, multiple different documents or agencies, and all the information is converging together and sharing the same reasoning, results, background information, observations, the convergence of evidence. Yes, it can have an effect.
No further question.
Just very quickly, do you ever have, after you go through a treatment plan over a course of years with patients, are you ever surprised that things were not as they seemed when you started? You ever have see something that comes up that was unexpected, or it didn't kind of jive with the story you originally heard?
Yes,
One thing just about your records, as far as your record keeping, do you keep those records during the meetings, or are they done afterwards?
both. Oftentimes, if I am in session with a child, and they say something of significance or something that is important, I will jot it down to make sure I can go in and fill in the blanks. Sometimes I will take notes during the session. It makes some children very nervous. It makes some adults very nervous.
So it's fair to say that the notes are a summary of a much larger discussion that you would have with the patient.
Sometimes, yes.
And how long after we can make those notes?
Well, I would try to do so immediately. Sometimes it's immediately after. Sometimes it's at the end of the evening. Sometimes the next day. I try to get them done as quickly as possible because, of course, memory and recall.
I'd pass it with this, Your Honor.
No further questions, Judge.
All right, is this witness excused or subject for recall?
Excuse from the state.
Excuse me, defense, Your Honor.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone except for attorneys for state or the defense. And please leave your records with the court reporter.
My personal records I brought?
Now, the records that are been, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Say, call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Natalie Kassum to the stand.
All right, can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, you can lower your hand. Make sure you keep your voice up for members of the jury. If you could state your name for the record, please.
Dr. Natalie Nikisha Kassum.
Your Honor,
Okay,
can we approach?
yes.
Fine, thank you.
How are you currently employed?
I am an associate professor at UT Health San Antonio and a child abuse pediatrician at the Center for Miracles.
And can you tell the jury a little bit more about your educational background?
Yes. I graduated from Emory University in 2003. Then I did medical school at the University of South Florida College of Medicine from 2004 to 2008. Then I did a residency in general pediatrics at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, DC from 2008 to 2011. And then I did a fellowship in child abuse pediatric at Hasbro Children's Hospital at Brown University from 2012 to 2015.
And are you you're licensed to practice medicine
Yes,
in the state of Texas?
yes.
And what does your practice consist of?
I do medical evaluations for a child when someone has a concern for child maltreatment. That includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, and all forms of neglect.
And do you have any specific trainings as it relates to sexual abuse?
So my fellowship training in child abuse pediatrics, the patients that I saw, someone had a concern for sexual abuse in some of those patients. I also attend conferences and remain up to date on the medical literature with regards to child sexual abuse.
And have you published any work in the past?
Yes,
And when was your last publication?
2024.
And Your Honor, at this time, the state has produced a timely notice of an affidavit for a business record. So the state would like to introduce the medical record pending any objections from defense.
And I'm sorry, state what is exhibit number?
8, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Your Honor, now at this time, the state would move to, would begin with the business record affidavit. The state would move to admit State's Exhibit 8 into evidence.
All right, any objections to state's exhibit number 8?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, state's exhibit number 8 is admitted without objection.
Dr. Kassum, where we left off, we were just talking about your educational background, some of your experience, and some of the training you have relating to sexual abuse. And again, we talked about some publications as well. Do you know how many medical evaluations you've conducted in your time as a doctor?
Every year I evaluate between 200 and 300 children.
And can you explain the process of what goes on during these medical evaluations?
Yes, when a family comes to our clinic, they register with our front desk staff. They have vital signs taken by our medical assistant. Then depending on the age of the child determines how we talk with and meet with the family. So in some young children, we will meet with the caregiver and get a history from the caregiver first, and then we will meet with the child. We meet with each person separately, individually, and then we meet with the child and get a history. Then we do a physical exam, head to toe, looking at all of the skin, all of the body parts. When it's concerned for sexual abuse, we use a colposcope, which is a big light and a magnifying glass to look at the external structures of the genitals as part of a physical exam. Then after the physical exam, we wrap up with the family. And again, depending on the age of the child, we'll wrap up with the child talking about what we saw in exam and what our thoughts are, and then what our next steps are going to be. And then we'll wrap up with the caregiver separately about the same issues. And then after that, if we order labs or any imaging, we'll look at those results, and then we'll write a note with our documenting our medical evaluation.
How do you know when a case is involving sexual abuse or something else?
We get referrals from different agencies. So in our community, when we have a non-acute sexual abuse, and that is when the last contact is outside 120 hours, that's classified as non-acute. The process in our communities, a report is made to law enforcement and CPS. They then refer the child to our Children's Advocacy Center to get a forensic interview. And then from there, the Children's Advocacy Center will refer to our clinic for a medical evaluation. And then we call the family and schedule that medical evaluation.
And is there typically an outcry that has happened by the time it's gotten to you?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury a little bit more about what an outcry is?
An outcry or disclosure is when a child says that someone has maltreated them, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect.
And do outcries typically happen immediately?
No. So what the medical literature shows, and in my experience, children don't typically tell about sexual abuse immediately. It takes months to years. One study that looked at kids, it took average 2 to 2.5 years for a child to disclose sexual abuse. And in that study, the closer the relationship is to the person who was abusing the child, the longer it took for that child to make a disclosure.
And can you also explain to the jury a little bit more about, let's say, incremental outcry?
So we call this, when we talk about disclosure for sexual abuse or any kind of abuse, we talk about disclosure as a process and not an event. And there are different parts of the process that we put a name to, but children don't necessarily go through the process in a stepwise fashion, nor do they have to go through all of these different parts of the process that we name. So we can have partial disclosure. So that's typically, we see that at the beginning of this whole evaluation process, which when I say evaluation process, I mean not just the medical evaluation, but the entire process when a child has disclosed sexual abuse. And a partial disclosure is when they tell a little bit of what happened. They don't tell everything. And then they can go on and have a full disclosure where they tell more stuff or everything that happened. Then they can go on and actually recant, so take back what they've said. And then they can go on and reaffirm what they said. And as I said, I've made it seem like a stepwise thing, but it's not stepwise. Some kids just have a full disclosure right away. Some kids never recant. Some kids recant and never reaffirm. Some kids recant, reaffirm, and then recant again, and then go back. So again, you can move through different versions of this, but these are just sort of broad categories that we think of. In truth, at the end of a case, if there's truly an end to a case, we never actually know if a child has given us a full disclosure, because if we weren't there when it happened, we don't know if they were ever able to tell every single thing that has happened to them.
And on or around March 1st of 2022, did you take part in a medical exam with Arbella Robbins?
Yes.
And who was with you when that exam was conducted?
During the physical exam,
Yes.
my fellow, who is a pediatrician who is learning to be a child abuse pediatrician, and I am their supervisor and program director, teaching her how to be a child abuse pediatrician, Dr. Dad, and mother was in the room. And I can't remember if my nurse was in the room with us too, because sometimes she's in the room with us also.
And so real quick, Your Honor, permissions are published.
Granted,
Can you see on your screen what is State's Exhibit A?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So can you explain to the jury, what is HPI right up here?
That stands for History of Present Illness. Every document that a medical professional does when you go see a physician or a medical provider for a complaint of some kind, they have to take an HPI, History of Present Illness. It's the reason that you came to see them.
And can you read for the jury what is written right underneath the HPI?
Yes. Arabella Robbins is a 7-year-old female referred to the Center for Miracles by ChildSafe for evaluation of sexual abuse. The ChildSafe referral document from 2/16/22 was reviewed prior to this encounter. During forensic interview, Arabella disclosed hand to genital, genital to hand, genital to anal contact by her father, Jordan Luke Robbins, 33 years old. Please reference the original documentation for additional details. Mother and Arabella were interviewed separately for the purposes of medical diagnosis and treatment.
So after this occurred, what were the next steps for for you to take?
So after this, I'm sorry, after what occurred?
So after, so Arabella and her mom were separated, as you mentioned, they were interviewed separately. What happens after that interview?
Then we do a physical exam.
And do you remember what what you observed during that exam relating to Arabella?
On physical exam, it was generally unremarkable. She had some bruises on her shins, which were normal for her age, otherwise completely normal physical exam.
And do you notice anything about her emotional condition?
Not that I recall.
And what were the results of your examination?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So you conducted a physical exam. You remember the results of the physical exam?
She had a normal physical exam.
And after the physical exam, sorry, what is the next step in the process?
If there are labs that need to be ordered because of the disclosure and the concerns we have for sexually transmitted infections, then we order those and send the child to the children's hospital to get those labs completed.
Would you be able to read from the top here what where it starts with the following information? Would you be able to read that for that paragraph for the jury until the last word right down here, please?
Yes. The following information was obtained from Arabella. Questions about home and school life were first used to establish rapport. Arabella was then asked why she had an appointment at our clinic today, and she replied that she did not know. I explained to her what will happen during her medical examination. When asked if anyone made her feel sad, scared, or confused, Arabella stated her father. She described that father would yell at her whenever she would make a small mistake, such as her math homework. He would yell at her. Arabella then shared when she was 6 years old, she felt uncomfortable when she was sleeping with father. She would feel father's private parts. Things cut off. He was wearing shorts. He was rubbing his private part on her front and back private parts over her pajamas. She described another time when father would help her shower. He would poke and scratch her front private.
And from that, did anything concern you about that?
Her disclosure describes hand to genital and genital contact.
I'm just going to show this chart right here. Can you just kind of walk the jury through what this is?
ROS stands for Review of Systems. When you come in, you do an HPI, right? That's the history that you tell the physician, why did I come to see you today? They're gonna ask you, say, for example, you went in because you're having lots of headaches. They're gonna ask you lots of questions about headaches, when, where, how, what do you do to make it better, what else happens, right? And they're gonna talk about that headache. Well, we also need to make sure there's nothing else going on that we didn't happen to ask you a question about in the HPI. So the review of systems is where we look at all the body systems and we ask questions about it, because some answers to those questions might give us some clues to what's going on that you're here for, but it can also give us clues to other medical problems that are happening.
So you conduct these medical exams. What are common misconceptions about these exams?
So one very big common misconception is that when a child discloses sexual abuse, especially if that disclosure involves penetration, that there will be some finding on physical exam that will tell us definitively that this sexual abuse has happened and that there has been penetration.
So real quick, when you talked about penetration, do children, from your experience, use the word penetration?
It depends on the age.
And from your experience, you'd say, is it older children that would understand?
Generally, older children would use that word.
What would younger children use instead?
In me.
And do those children understand fully what penetration means?
It depends. So sometimes they will say, someone put something in me. Other times they will just talk about touching, and then we ask questions to determine whether there was an inside or an outside, and that's how we ask the questions. We explain that that part of your body has an inside and an outside. Did this happen on the inside of your body or the outside of your body?
So, and you also conducted, and there was also one of these exams done on with Arabella, correct?
A physical exam? Yes.
And in terms of so, there was also a sexual assault nurse's examination as well. There was one done?
It depends on what you mean by sexual assault nurse examination.
Well, can you explain what a sexual assault nurse examination is?
So those words are interpreted differently by different people. In my experience, when someone says a sexual assault nurse exam has been conducted, they typically mean that a forensic evidence kit has been collected in conjunction with the medical evaluation for sexual abuse. But what a sexual assault nurse does is the same medical exam that we do. They take a history, they do a full physical exam, head to toe, they do photo documentation, and then they document their assessment of the entire evaluation.
And there was one of those done with Arabella.
A complete medical evaluation, yes.
And what was the result of that?
So my assessment at the end was concerning for child sexual abuse.
And did you have any recommendations based off of your assessment?
Yes, so in cases of concern for child sexual abuse, our recommendations, we do testing for sexually transmitted infections. We recommend counseling for children and families with counselors who have experience working with children who have been sexually abused. We recommend no unsupervised contact with the person that they disclose sexual abuse about. And we recommend continued follow-up with your pediatrician. Depending on the age, we would recommend completing the vaccines that are normal vaccines for children.
And you mentioned that findings were normal. Is that common in these types of instances?
Yes. In 95 to 97% of children who are evaluated when they have a concern for child sexual abuse, their physical exam is completely normal, regardless of the kind of contact that the child has disclosed.
And then again, you mentioned the testing. Can you just explain a little bit more for just what is part of right here?
Real quickly.
Yes. That has been admitted. A line was marked on it, and that line was marked by the state, and that line should not have been marked. So what is going to happen is that page is going to be removed without objection from the defense. It's going to be recopied, and it will be put back in the exhibit without a line or writing. All right, does everyone understand? All right. State, you may proceed.
And once again, you talk about normal findings. Does a normal finding prove or disprove whether sexual assault has occurred? Sexual abuse?
No, because most exams are normal, we can't rely on the exam to be the reason that we're making a diagnosis or not making a diagnosis.
Pass the witness, Judge.
Defense.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Kassum.
Yeah.
I'm John Place. Nice to meet you. I just wanted, it sounds like did you say that you have done 200 to 300 of these evaluations?
I've evaluated 200 to 300 patients per year, not all of them for sexual abuse.
How many have you evaluated for sexual abuse?
Per year, maybe 100. We don't separate them out.
Okay. And how long have you been doing the exams?
I was a fellow starting in 2012.
So you've done A lot of these.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we started off with the, I guess, how the process began. How was this case referred to you?
From a Children's Advocacy Center, Child Safe.
It came directly from Child Safe.
Yes.
Who else do you accept referrals from?
CPS, law enforcement, pediatricians, emergency room physicians.
It'd be people who it's normally from law enforcement or from CPS.
It's from a wide variety of places.
You talked kind of at the end about where these reports go afterwards. Who are the reports shared with after they're completed?
After they're completed, if CPS and law enforcement is involved, they receive copies of our report.
And so if they were referred through CPS or law enforcement, they're the only ones that can get those reports back.
If they are involved, even if they didn't refer them to us,
Can you release them to anyone else?
not without a release of information from families.
You talked a little bit about the disclosure process. And I'm guessing that you've been trained in outcry and disclosure.
Yes,
We talked about partial disclosure. Can you remind us what is that?
when the child does not tell everything that happened.
And you mentioned full disclosure,
Yes,
and that would be when you're told everything that happened.
as far as we know, yes.
Okay. You mentioned recantation. There are times when children recant, correct?
Yes,
And there are times when they will reaffirm after they recant.
yes,
Correct. There are also times when children recant and they don't reaffirm, right?
yes,
Okay. So you can't tell, from whether a child recants or whether a child doesn't recant. It's not your job to get to the truth of the matter, right?
no,
Okay. You're not an investigator.
I am not.
You mentioned you never know if you get the full disclosure, right?
That's correct.
You never know if you're told the truth, right?
That's correct.
The physical exam, I couldn't tell from the report. Was the mom in the room during the physical exam in this case?
Yes,
So is the mom, I'm sorry,
my fellow Dr. Ryan.
your fellow doctor who's being trained in the child. Did you, I think you answered this, so I just want to be clear. There was not any evidence collection in this particular case.
No,
There were no swabs or DNA or anything like that.
no.
Why would you have not conducted, I guess, the swabs and that kind of examination?
Forensic evidence kit is collected when last contact was within 120 hours of the medical evaluation.
And could you tell from the history when the last allegation of contact was?
I don't recall.
But you know that it was greater than that period of time?
Yes,
What was the date on this exam?
March 1st, 2022.
So if there was some sort of allegation that something happened in January, for example, you would not do a swab?
Not a forensic evidence kit.
Okay, which would be the swabbing for the DNAs that could be collect evidence and whatnot.
Yes,
Okay, so you expressed that you had some concerns in response to the prosecutor's questions. And there were concerns about sexual abuse, is what you testified to, right?
yes,
And those concerns would have come solely from the history that you received from the mom and the child, correct?
yes.
Did you review any other documents prior to, do you have staff with police or with detectives prior to an examination?
No,
And that's important, that you don't need to know any of that for your purposes.
correct.
We talked a little bit about the, I guess, just the physical part of the medical exam. It seemed as, I guess you did kind of a general head to toe exam.
Yes,
You went through the skin, the eyes, the ears, all the way down to gastrointestinal. You found that all those were normal, within normal ranges.
yes,
She was how old at the time?
7,
Okay. You also did an examination of the skin, neck, chest, lung, cardiovascular, abdomen, right?
yes,
And all that was in normal ranges.
yes,
Back and buttocks. The buttocks, would that include a external examination of the anus?
yes,
And there were no abnormalities in that region.
that's correct.
And then we have the exam of the genitalia, right? She was 7 years old. Can you explain to us about, and you're going to have to help me, Doc, with this, the estrogenized, estrogenized versus non-estrogenized. Can you tell us what that means and why it's relevant?
I can tell you what it means.
Yes, tell us what it means. If you pronounce it better than I can.
Yes. So when we say that something is estrogenized, it means that it has the effects of estrogen, the hormone, on it, and we can see those effects of estrogen. And when we think of the female genitalia, traditionally, when we think of estrogen and having an effect, you think of puberty, because that's when your body starts to produce more hormones, including estrogen, and you grow secondary sex characteristics, which makes a female child look more like an adult woman with growing breasts, hair in armpits and on the pubis, and then also changes what the genitals look like and appear. We also have estrogen on board when we're born, because of maternal estrogen crosses the placenta and that affects the newborn infant. And that estrogen effect, you can see it on the genitals, and that can last up to 3 years, the appearance of having that estrogen effect. Then you have that period in between, that newborn period or that young toddler period, all the way through school-age children before they start puberty and then have that spike in estrogen again, where you have non-estrogenized appearance of the genitals.
And so a child at this age, would they be estrogenized?
Not typically.
And does the effect of estrogen, does it make the vagina in this case, does it make it more pliable, for lack of a better term?
The vaginal canal is a big muscle, and so it's a canal of muscle, and so it is always pliable and stretchy.
But when it's estrogenized, is it more so?
I've never read anything that quantifies the pliability of the vaginal muscles.
Does estrogenize, does that lead to the vagina being more likely to be healed after injury?
No,
So in this particular case, so can you tell us exactly what you did when you examined the genitalia?
we placed a child in this age group. Typically, we place her in what we call a frog-like position, which is where the feet are together like they're clapping and the legs are out like butterfly wings. That way we can see all of these structures. We use the colposcope, which, as I explained before, is a big light and magnifying glass. It doesn't touch the patient. It's about 12 inches away from the patient. And we then move the labia majora, which is the big pieces of skin that cover the vaginal opening and the vaginal structures. So we move those aside so then we can see all of the structures of the genitalia.
And after you were done conducting that examination, you found that the labia was normal,
Yes,
the vestibule was normal,
yes,
the hymen was normal,
yes,
and the vagina was normal.
yes.
And the anus was normal.
Yes,
Have you ever had, and you observed no injury to this child based on that examination?
yes,
Have there been instances with a child of this age where you have seen injuries before?
yes,
Have there been times where you've seen scarring,
yes,
healed wounds,
yes.
and that would have come from penetration?
That's what we believe, yes.
It could have come from penetration. There was an injury that healed over and you could see it during this examination.
Yes,
I know that that's not something you see all the time, but there are times when you do find evidence of sexual abuse, especially in traumatic injury.
I would say, yes, there are times, 4 to 5%, some studies have shown 7% of cases have physical exam findings. Traumatic injury, every injury is traumatic because it's caused by trauma.
And so in a case like this, when you are examining the child's genitals, you're looking for that 7%. I mean, what's the purpose of that exam at that point?
So the biggest reason that we do physical exams when there's a concern for sexual abuse is to ensure that the child is physically well, mentally, physically well. We are pediatricians, that is our entire goal. In the small amount of cases that there are physical exam findings, then we can document that. In the small amount of cases that we have sexually transmitted infections, we can find and treat those. But the overall biggest reason is to ensure that this child's physical and mental well-being.
And so in most of your cases, the results or the areas that would lead to concern, as you testified earlier, would just be from the narrative that you received from the patient in most of your cases.
Yes,
One other thing, I'm make sure I understand it. There is, it says sexual maturity rating, breast 1, pubic hair 1. What does that indicate?
sexual maturity rating is a way that medical professionals communicate with each other about where on the spectrum of pubertal development a child is. So it's ratings 1 through 5, and there are specific things that you look for as you start to, go through puberty. When you first start having increased levels of hormones, you get breast buds, and then your breasts get bigger. And there are different pictures of and descriptions of what each stage of that sexual maturity rating is.
And so if, for example, pubic hair, number 1, would that indicate that there was no pubic hair?
That's correct.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
All right, state.
Briefly, Dr. Kassum, first, just want to take a step back. You mentioned that your fellow was with you as during this exam.
That's correct.
Is your fellow still in San Antonio?
No,
And you also mentioned that you specialize, you're a pediatrician, you do a lot of work, of course, with children and also with sexual abuse. What are some of the signs of sexual abuse?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Do children display signs of sexual abuse or from your
Objection, Your Honor.
experience?
All right, could you repeat the question, please?
So it's gonna say, based on your training and experience, do children exemplify or show any signs or symptoms if they have been sexually abused?
All right, any objections?
I guess it depends on what the answer's gonna be. If she is testifying about an opinion about some kind of expert opinion, I think we need to drill down. I'm not sure what he's asking, honestly, Your Honor.
Just generally.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna have you all step outside and I'll bring you back in at 4:20. Remember my previous instructions. Everyone, please rise for the jurors. All right, everyone, please be seated. And everyone, just give me 5 minutes. All right, everyone, please be seated and state It's still your witness.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Kassum, based on your training and experience, what are some of the behavioral signs or symptoms that a child of sexual abuse would display?
There is no typical signs of behavioral signs that a child who has been sexually abused displayed. Every person responds to sexual trauma differently. I've seen children who all reports from everyone in their lives that they are happy, healthy, completely normal children. And then I've seen children who have suicidal ideation, have attempted to end their life, is severely depressed, and then the entire spectrum in the middle. So there is no behaviors that when I see it, I say, oh man, that child has been sexually abused. There are behaviors where a child displays information like knowledge and behavior that is outside what is expected regarding sexual matters for a child of a certain age, depending on where they are developmentally. And that deserves further evaluation and investigation, but does not definitively mean that a child has been sexually abused.
Have you seen PTSD before?
Yes,
Have you seen nightmares before?
yes,
And again, defense asked some questions about the normality of these findings, and you mentioned that the anus was normal
yes,
and the labia was normal
yes,
and the vagina was normal.
yes,
But again, just as you testified previously, somebody could be a victim and still have normal findings, correct?
yes,
In fact, it's overwhelmingly common.
yes.
Pass the witness.
Thank you.
Defense.
Just very quickly, just follow up. So, you testified that children who, I guess, make allegations of sexual abuse demonstrate all sorts of different behaviors. That some are happy and a report from all the family members that they seem to be happy and well settled and adjusted. There's times where you see that kind of behavior.
Yes,
All the way to the other extreme where you see children who have anxiety, who are suicidal. Is that true?
yes,
So it's based on your expert testimony, your role in an investigation like this, you cannot take anything, you cannot make an assessment of sexual abuse or not based on how a child behaves.
as I said, there are some behaviors that deserve further exploration that might mean that a child has been sexually abused or they've been exposed to inappropriate sexual material. But blanketly, in general, there's no behaviors that if I see that, I'm saying that child has been sexually abused.
Right, and it could be other reasons for those behaviors that are outside of the allegation.
Yes,
I'd pass the witness.
Nothing further, Judge.
All right, is this witness excused or subject for recall?
Excuse from the state.
Excuse me, defense.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone except for attorneys for the state or the defense. All right, if you'll please leave the exhibit with the court reporter. Thank you. State, call your next witness.
State Cost, Miriam, Sandal.
All right, if you can raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can lower your hand, state your name for the record.
Miriam Sandal.
Hi, Ms. Sandoval. How are you employed?
I am currently the Director of Client Services at ChildSafe.
What is child?
ChildSafe is the child advocacy center here in San Antonio that provides services to children and their family members of any children that have been victims of abuse or alleged victims of abuse.
What kind of services does ChildSafe provide to these families and children?
They provide mental health services, we provide forensic interviewing services, and family advocacy services.
So before, what is a forensic interview? Can you explain that to the jury?
A forensic interview is an interview conducted by a specialized trained professional in order to gather information from a child that has either made an allegation of abuse or has been alleged to have been a victim of any type of abuse.
And what does the interview consist of?
The interview consists of being asked open-ended, non-leading questions.
And who is the person that interviews the child? You said a trained professional?
Yes, they are interviewed by a trained forensic interviewer.
So what does a person need to go through to become a trained interviewer?
In the state of Texas, you have to go through 3 separate block trainings. Each one of those trainings is at least 3 days. They happen in person or virtual, and during those trainings, you cover everything from how to speak to children of different ages, children that may have disabilities. You cover court testimony, different types of abuse, and you basically learn how it is to interview children.
And do these forensic interviewers go through training constantly and annually?
Yes, after you complete those very first training sessions, then you must do continuing education training. So you have to do at least 8 hours every 2 years, with some of that time dedicated specifically to be training on forensic interviewing.
And where within child safe? So tell us a little bit about the interview room and the environment. Where is the child interviewed?
The child is interviewed in a room where it's only the interviewer and the child. The interviews are audio and video recorded. And while they are happening, they are also live streamed per se to a room that's across the hallway from the forensic interview room, where investigators can see live what is happening in the interview room.
So doing this interview room, where's the family?
The family is in a separate family waiting room or in our front lobby.
So you essentially just have the child and the interviewer in one room.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and typically how long does the interview take?
Every interview is different. Some interviews can be as short as 20 minutes. Some interviews can be as long as 3 hours. On average, we tell families that the interviews could last anywhere around that time, but typically it could be about an hour, hour and a half.
So you mentioned that the approach that the interviewer takes is asking non-leading questions, am I correct?
Yes, open-ended, non-leading questions.
Okay, so can you be a little bit more specific as to what approach do they normally take? I mean, what does an interview start with?
An interview will first start with us preparing the room, so we want to make sure that our cameras are working, that we have everything in the room that we'll need for the interview. Then the very first thing we do when we get into the interview room with the child is that we do rapport, so we get to know them a little bit. We ask them about school, hobbies, anything that can help them get comfortable with us and get them used to answering our questions. Then we will talk to them about some rules that we have for the interview. Then we'll talk about the difference between telling the truth and a lie, ask them to promise to tell us the truth while we talk today, and then we'll start to get into why it is that they're there at Child Safe to speak to us.
When you talk about, so essentially you set up the rules before the interview, right, with the child. How does an interviewer ensure that the child understands the difference between a truth and a lie?
We will ask them for examples, or we give them examples. The very first thing that we'll try is that we will ask them what it means. So we'll ask, what does it mean to tell the truth? What does it mean to tell a lie? Children answer that in all kinds of different ways. If they give us an answer where it's, for example, a truth is to not tell a lie, and a lie is to not tell the truth. Well, that doesn't necessarily tell us that they know the definition or that they understand, so we may then give them an example, like color are the walls, how many chairs are in here, and then we'll give them a different answer and have them identify if that's the truth or a lie.
So this may be a silly question, but with the children, I guess we start with the rules, right? And then after the rules start, why is it so important to have the interview just with the child?
It's important for the interview to just be the child and the interviewer, so that essentially while you're in the room, we are preserving the integrity of the investigation. There's no outside influence from anyone else in that room. There's no investigators there, there's no family members there. So that child can feel comfortable and really be able to answer those questions however it is that they want to.
So what happens after the interview is conducted?
Once the interview is done, the forensic interviewer will take the child back to the family member that took them to that appointment. We then will burn a copy of the interview onto a physical DVD, and we provide that to the investigators that are there for the case.
And by investigator, do you mean like law enforcement?
Yes, they could be either law enforcement or child protective services or both.
Do you, you mentioned that Child Safe provides services. One of those services was the forensic interview, but you also, I think you mentioned referrals, or did you say other kinds of services? What happens with all that? How do you provide that to the family?
Yeah, so other services that we do is family advocacy, which is advocates for the family. And they provide victim support services. So they talk to the family about any needs that they may have, and then they can provide them referrals to either our internal counseling services or other services in the community that can serve whatever needs they have.
Now, do you know if a child under the name of Arabella went to visit Child Safe in 2022?
Yes, she did.
Okay, do you know who interviewed the child?
Yes, she was interviewed by Dionisio Hernandez.
Was that a forensic interviewer at the time?
Yes, she was a forensic interviewer at the time.
Is Dionisia still employed with Child Safe?
No, she is not employed with Child Safe anymore.
How long has she not been employed?
She has not been employed with Child Safe, I believe, since March of 2022 or March of 2023. I can't exactly remember, but it's been quite some time that she hasn't been with our agency.
And you know this because you work in the same place, right? In the Child Safe?
Yes, that's right.
And as the director of client services, do you oversee the forensic interviewers?
Yes, I do supervise the forensic interviewers.
Before you became the director, were you a forensic interviewer yourself?
Yes, and I can still conduct forensic interviews today.
So up to this point, how many interviews have you conducted?
I have done over 1,000 interviews since I have been at Child Safe.
Okay. You mentioned that Dionisia is she not in San Antonio, or why? Do you know the reason why she's not here or not in Child Safe?
She no longer resides in San Antonio, and I believe that she does have some ongoing medical issues that don't allow her to travel or be able to provide testimony.
Pass it, witness, Judge.
All right, defense?
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Sandoval, you're the Director of Client Services for Child Safe?
Yes, that's right.
What does that mean? What do you do?
That means that I supervise the forensic interviewers, the family advocates, and a couple of other client and partner facing programs.
And client means what?
A client is going to be a child or their family members that are there with the child at the time of their appointment.
And then you mentioned partners. What kind of partners do you have at Child Safe?
Some of our multidisciplinary team partners are going to be law enforcement, child protective services, the district attorney's office, the medical component, and the juvenile DA's office as well.
Okay. You have a big facility in Bexar County, right?
Yes, we do.
About 13,000 square feet.
I'm not sure exactly how big it is.
It's a large new facility.
Yes, it is.
And it offers lots of services for the community.
Yes, it does.
The multidisciplinary team that you discussed, what's the importance of having a multidisciplinary team?
It's so that we can ensure that there is a collaborative and joint response to all of these cases, and that cases don't fall through the cracks, and they get services from all the different agencies that need to be involved in it.
Okay. And do the members of the multidisciplinary team, do they have office space at Child Safe?
Yes, some of them do.
Does the DA's office have office space there?
No, they do not.
Do the police have office space there?
Yes, they do.
CPS have office space there?
Yes, they do.
And so when you get a referral, you may get a referral from one of the police partners that you work with, right?
Yes,
There's other times you get it through CPS.
yes, that's right.
Do you get referrals from anywhere else other than law enforcement and CPS?
No, that's where most of our referrals come from.
Do you know if that's a requirement and by the statute that only law enforcement and CPS can refer clients for forensic interviews?
It is in our working protocols that the request has to come from an investigative party, and that typically is going to be law enforcement or CPS.
So it's fair to say that that Child Safe works very closely with law enforcement.
Yes, we do work closely with law enforcement.
We talked a little bit about the importance of, let me back up, the forensic interview, how they're conducted. Typically, a forensic interviewer, what kind of heads up do they have about the client that's coming in? What kind of material do they typically get before they do the interview?
Prior to the interview, we'll meet with the investigators, so whether that's the law enforcement or CPS, so that they can brief us on what the outcry is or what it is that they are investigating.
And so you basically work through them, what you're looking for.
They tell us whatever investigation is going on in the case.
Okay. And then you meet with, I guess, the family and the child, right?
Yes,
To develop some rapport with them. And then the child is interviewed alone, right?
yes, the child is interviewed alone with the interviewer.
And they're always interviewed alone with the interviewer.
Yes,
And why is that important?
like I said, so that the child is able to freely be able to talk about whatever allegation has been made without there being any other influence in the room.
And you also talked about the importance, I guess, the training and the way questions are asked. How important it is to ask non-leading questions. Why is that?
So that the answer is not in the question and the child again is able to answer those questions however they want without us looking for any specific answers.
And you're aware that law enforcement is typically trained in these kinds of cases not to ask questions so that they don't contaminate the process, right?
Ideally, yes.
Because you don't want them, number one, you want them re-traumatizing a child that may have been traumatized already, right?
Yes,
You also don't want them accidentally leading the child or coaching the child, correct?
correct.
Okay. And so that's why you got the forensic interview trained, especially to ask these questions in a very specific way.
Yes, that's right.
So you'll conduct a interview. Is the interview's videotaped, right?
Yes, it is.
And the typically either, I guess, CPS, law enforcement, or both will actually watch the interview as it's being conducted, correct?
Yes,
And there's be a time when the interview is completed that the forensic interview will leave the room and confer with law enforcement and CPS to see if there's anything else they need to ask.
yes, we do.
Okay. So it's fair to say this whole process, you're working very closely with law enforcement and CPS as part of their investigative team.
Yes, we are working with them.
You mentioned that you've done, it sounds like you've done over 1,000 interviews yourself.
Yes, I have.
Just so we're all clear, it's not your job to determine whether a child is telling the truth or not during these interviews, right?
Yes, that's right.
In fact, that your education and training tells you that's not your goal. Right?
That's correct.
Your goal is just to basically be a facilitator so that the child can give you the story as they are relaying.
Yes, that's right.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
State.
Briefly, Judge, Ms. Sandoval, you mentioned that, for defense brought up the point that you're more like the facilitator to talk to the child, to give all the information, right? Oftentimes, you would agree with me that this is the first time the child gets to talk about most details, because, as defense mentioned, law enforcement don't really talk to children, right?
Yes, in our experience, most of the time they'll bring the children to Child Safe for their interview.
And there are several reasons why they may not talk to the children and wait until the forensic interview is conducted. As part of your experience, has it ever happened where a child does not disclose everything in the child's interview?
Yes, that does also happen.
Would you say that that is common?
Yes, that is common.
So even though you work with law enforcement, you're not a detective, right?
No, Child Safe is a neutral third party. We are a nonprofit agency.
Neutral third party. So I guess help me reconcile the fact that you're a neutral third party, but at the same time, you do meet with a detective beforehand to get a little bit of the information before the interview starts.
We're a neutral third party in that we don't investigate the cases ourselves. We are there to provide a service to assist them in the investigation, but ultimately, what they decide to do with the information, what happens in the investigation has nothing to do with us. We don't have any control over, so we don't, for lack of a better term, win or lose anything based on what comes out of that interview. We're simply there to listen to the children, talk to them, ask them questions.
That's what it's.
Defense?
Thank you, Judge. And just very quickly, so just so we clear up, the Child Safe organization is part of a multidisciplinary team, correct?
Yes,
And that team involves law enforcement and CPS and a few other investigative agencies, right?
yes.
Okay. One of the things that Mr. Saldana just asked you was about, I guess, the way questions were asked and the importance of these kind of non-leading questions and how you don't really have, I guess, an interest in the outcome. Is it important? It kind of goes back to where I started, but is it important for children to come in from your experience without being coached by an outside non-professional?
Yes, in my opinion, it would be important.
In fact, it would be, it caused you concern if you knew that there was someone on the outside coaching over you about what to say, right?
Yes, that could be concerning.
Would it cause you concern if you were to find out that there was someone who was, persistently questioning someone about the allegations before they came in and gave their forensic interview?
That could be concerning.
I passed the witness, Your Honor.
No further question.
All right, is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're only allowed to speak to attorneys for the state or the defense and no one else. All right, thank you. And did you bring any documents with you or no?
No.
All right, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for today. And Deputy Laura will take you back to the jury room and I'll come back and speak with you briefly. All right, everyone, please rise for the jurors. All right, everyone, please be seated. And we're off the record. You can shut it down. Thank you. All right. So attorneys, the way I know when people are talking too fast or talking too softly, the court reporter has real time up for me. So when I see her slowing down with what she's typing into the system, I know that people are not talking loud enough. So this is what we're going to do. Tomorrow, I've already had them print out the jury charge. This is just a draft. So if you all can review it and let me know, if you want something extra, if there's something you don't approve of, and if there's not an agreement that can be reached, then I'll make the decision. Right. So based upon the number of witnesses that state you're telling me you have left and the length of time they're going to take and the number of witnesses that you all have, I anticipate that closing arguments will be first thing Monday at 9 a.m. Not 9:01, not 9:02, 9 a.m. because this jury has been very diligent and always being on time and ready to go. All right, so, and before you all leave, the exhibits, if you all could get those redacted, however you agreed to redact them, so that they'll be ready.
Yeah, it's 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, is there anything else I need to take up with you all?
Thank
All
you,
right.
Judge. Thank you for your time.
All right, I'm going to let the jury know if there is no objections when I anticipate this ending, because some of them, their employers, we're having to write notes for them, which we shouldn't have to do because employers are supposed to know you can't penalize someone for serving on a jury trial, but I like to alleviate any fears they have.
It really helps. Judge writes a letter to the court.
Yes. Yes.
And they're also aware that the event is elected. I'm not sure, so in the event that it's not there, you would
Oh, we're gonna go right in if we get to that point.